it's your girl, Deshaunda Carter, but you can call me DC. Thanks so much for tuning in today to my show, When the Blue Comes Off. Sit back, relax, take notes, do what you like, and let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my very special guest, retired New York City Department of Correction Assistant Chief, okay, Mr. Sean Jones. Hey!
Give myself a round of applause here. That's an excellent, magnanimous introduction, very phenomenal.
That's right, only for phenomenal people, you know?
Yeah, so it's a pleasure, to have me on the platform. I want to thank you for that. When the blue comes off, it's a very unique perspective that you give people an opportunity to kind of talk to, things that they do post their careers, right?
Right.
And it's this is specifically tied to a career that we both understand, correction, but just overall in general, people have lives post their initial career, right? And they go to different things and have different facets of their life. And I think that's one of the most unique things about us as people. Once we get around understanding labels and we get away from the label, then our growth begins, right? So we get to understand how to expand ourselves and our lives and become, greater people and kind of venture into other worlds that we would have never thought that we would venture into, like you having this platform.
Right.
And first, let me start off by saying that I've known you professionally for a very long time, at least over a decade or so. And since the first time that I've met you, the first time we were introduced, I think at the time I might have been doing something with public information in the correction department in New York City, movies or something of that nature. And the ambitions are always there. Like, you can see it when a person talks to you, you can see it in your eyes. Like, you have a dedication and ambition. So it's not difficult or hard to understand how you have such a platform or are able to, heighten your life and awareness and intelligence to get you to these realms, to be able to have such platforms in the businesses and business ideas that you have. Like, if a person gets to know you and have a conversation with you and they're about much of anything, then they can see immediately. People recognize things that they understand. And if you understand a person that has an executive mentality, you recognize that as soon as you see it. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate that. But I want to talk about you. What made you decide to become a correction officer? Like, this is not for everybody. So at some point, you were sitting home, you had to go take the test. Like, what was it that said, man, let me go take this CO test?
Well, so, when I took the correction exam in New York City, it was a dual exam. Right, okay, because I think that's important to mention that a lot of people at the time that I took it took a dual exam.
So I took that test too. That was the one with PD, the PD combination.
Yeah, right. So it was NYPD and New York City Correction was a dual exam, and whoever called you first, right, for most instances is who a lot of people went to. For me, I had a job career. As a teenager, I worked for Reese Restaurants, in accounts payable division. And for those who don't know, Reese Restaurants, they basically started the food court. So back in the days, you would walk into it would be a Nathan's Pizza Hut,
yes,
combo and all of these things. But I worked in the office, right, and they had, I want to say, thousands of stores. They had Chock full of Nuts. They had Houlihan's, TGI Fridays, Dunkin' Donuts, Tad's Steakhouse. I mean, it just was a lot. So that was kind of my first introduction into, having a job and a career. And then from there, schooling and different things of that nature. But I went to, I grew up in a household that was a civil service household. Mm-hmm. My father was a police officer. My stepfather worked for the MTA, and my mother at the time worked for traffic.
Okay, right? So that's real civil service going on. Okay,
right. So I had that, and that's when she worked with traffic. That was years ago. A lot of, I don't know how I dated your listeners. I hope they're very expansive, and it goes the whole spectrum. But they used to call them brownies back then.
Right.
So And they used to wear the skirts and all that kind of stuff back in the days. But so I grew up in a civil service household, and on my kitchen table was the chief leader.
Right.
Like that was a staple. That was a staple in the household, right? So it came. I think it was every like Wednesday or something like that, and I would never really pay attention to it. But it was always on the table, and you would see on the cover they would have these. And I guess they still do. I haven't seen it in a while, but they would have the, when if a job was out, a job opportunity, they were sort of posting hiring for this, that, and the third. So that was in my transition. So I always understood that was a way to become employed if you didn't want to go the traditional collegiate, formalized education route.
Right.
So I understood that because I worked with people in my household and my family who did that. But I had several careers. So I started off working after I talked about Reese, but I went to the post office. I worked in the post office for some time. I went from the post office to United Parcel Service. Worked in the UPS for some time. I went from UPS to MTA.
Damn. Okay, I thought I had a lot of jobs. Okay.
Yeah, and then from MTA, I went to the New York City Department of Correction. I'm taking that dual exam, and it was just a natural progressive, state. Obviously, there were things interim. Life exists in between those things.
Right.
But so for me, it was almost like a subconscious progression. Because it was something that we standardized in my household and my family structure, and most of us, we're taught to, go on a route that we see, our families designed for us, and that was something that was known in my family at the time. So I took a lot of these exams, and I wound up venturing. And again, my father was a police officer, so to some extent, I was not unfamiliar with law enforcement.
Right.
I was really quite familiar with it. I even worked at a point in time, believe it or not, I worked. And so I graduated high school in Savannah, Georgia, and Alfred E. Beach. Big shout out to all the Beach alumni. And that's how I graduated high school. I went to high school here. I went to Kennedy in the Bronx too for 2 years. But my last 2 years, my mother moved to Savannah. And when I graduated, I actually had an opportunity to work in the jail. I worked in the jail out there for a period of time.
In the civilian realm, or
in a civilianized role, and I worked a lot with the programming staff, and so they would help rehabilitate those incarcerated. They had the GED programs, and help them with mathematics and things of that nature as they were kind of learning to how to rehabilitate themselves. So I worked a lot of that with the program staff. But in these worlds, in correctional worlds, you actually there's a separation of responsibility, but there's alignment of work. Mm-hmm. So it's a line facet between a uniform and a non-uniform when it comes to like actually performing some of the day-to-day and getting these programs and things done. When the bells and stuff go on, then the roles kind of like you kind of clearly get an understanding of who's who. But the simple work, when the process is going along, you kind of align, and you guys have to kind of work together. So I kind of got an understanding of that. So when this exam came along, and I wasn't green to it, so I kind of understood how the process worked. I had seen guns before. Obviously, my father was a police officer. So these things were not unfamiliar to me. So it was just one of those things where you kind of like find yourself taking these exams, and then people call you, right? And,
so let me ask you, if PD would have
called
called you first, do you think you would have went?
I gotta tell you, honestly, no. Because, and I'll tell you why. It's more of a. So my father, years ago, my father had asked me years ago, did I want to join up NYPD Explorers? Mm-hmm, and and NYPD Explorers is like a ROTC,
right?
For lack of a better way of putting it, for those who are interested in law enforcement careers. But I grew up like most people in the inner city grow up. I had a stigmatism against the police department. Mm-hmm. Right? I had a stigmatism, even though my father was a detective, sergeant detective, high ranking. Big shout out to my father, by the way, George Gaines. So it wasn't something that I grew up adoring. Right. Only because after a certain age, when you start hitting your teenage years, growing up between the Bronx and Harlem, where why I fluctuated, your interactions are not always favorable.
Absolutely.
Right? Not that you don't get challenges in the correction department, but my day-to-day interaction with the police department or the incidents that I've had with them, led me not to consciously want to align myself. And I remember my father asking me, and he was like, "You sure you don't want to do that?" And I'm like, "No." And I never really said anything, but consciously I knew that I didn't want to be a part of that because of the way we was treated. And then I will say at the time, it was a predominantly Caucasian police department, right?
Right.
And I had incidents. I've been pulled over, thrown on cars, guns drawn, all that kind of stuff, for nothing. Mm-hmm. Right? We just doing nothing, just sitting here and doing, so those things, they sit badly with you, especially when you grow up in a family environment, right? Where you kind of got loved, not kind of, but when you're loved, you get hugs and kisses, you know what I mean? And you get people love you, they care about you. You get gifts on Christmas and stuff like that, right? And I say that because it goes completely opposite what you're being taught. When you get indoctrinated into being taught that, treat people nice and be conscious of your conversations with them, be conscious of the things that, you do around them. My grandma used to tell me, make sure you know the lady's name, or the person rather, who cleans the restroom. They're important to your life. Try using the restroom while it's dirty.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's
I came from that kind of a family that you don't discount. My grandmother picked cotton and watermelon. You know what I mean? They grew up in a place called Sylvania, Georgia. Same spelling but pronounced differently, right? Just when she became a teenager, late year 17 or something, she moved to Savannah with her sisters. But it was a bunch of them, and they grew up hard. They grew up in the fields, and her father, was a sharecropper. You get paid 1%, if that, of everything that you grow on someone else's farm. And I remember just talking to my grandmother, who's still alive, God bless her, 89 years old. She'll be 90 this year, but she would say that they didn't have food. He was a sharecropper of somebody else's land, and they didn't have food. And he would have to go out sometimes and steal things, steal food, steal animals, steal pigs and stuff to feed them. So I grew up in a perspective of being loved and watching them. My grandmother was an accountant, and just so a person, and my great aunts rather, they were like dietitians of hospitals and, big supervisors in the telephone company. But these are people who grew up, putting their hands in dirt and picking out, in fields and stuff like that, right? So just trying to make a living and sharing clothes and shoes and, growing up, they didn't really have any birth control back then. It was the rhythm system. And if you was off rhythm, and if you was off rhythm, then I guess, it was a good thing. But at the end, it was a result that came from that. And it was a child. So, I want to get the number wrong. It was like 11 of them, growing up in these small households. And, so I came from that perspective, so I understood perspective. I understood the dynamics of that. So me dealing with, my father asked me that, and knowing how I was treated, growing up as a kid, or come here, get over here, where you going, just the aggressive tone, and now that I understand now, being educated and understanding about law enforcement and policing, that was the furthest thing at the time from community policing, right? So where community policing is more so, the people in your community who are affecting the community in itself, and they know you, they know the names. They would bring the children home and say, he's been acting up, I brought him home.
Yes.
And your parents would, handle you accordingly, right? So,
right.
By the time I grew up, they had got away from that.
Right.
And again, for a lot of reasons, right? Police officers have a tough job, right? Some of it is you have individuals who have, overtones, or rather say, conscious, thoughts of things, and they have these inner beliefs, like racism and things of that nature. But overall, so you're fighting a war to a great extent, especially when you're dealing with in communities or where people are being assaulted and robbed and different things of that nature, and you have to walk into these situations constantly on a continuous basis. Even in corrections department, every time you walk in a housing area and it's 32 or 30, I forget the number now, it's been a minute, inmates in a cell area, or 50 in a dorm area, you're dealing with these personalities, and any one of these individuals, can be of an aggressive nature.
Now, were you ever concerned? Now, so you went through the academy and you came on the job. When you came on the job, because you have this perception and you had this intel, and you work down in the facilities in the South, when you came into the actual building, how was that for you? Because you had insight. You did have insight.
Yeah.
Some people come into corrections without any. I mean, my mom was on the job, so I had a good amount of insight to know what I was going into. How did you?
Correction baby.
Right, exactly. Correction money took care of me. So,
no doubt.
Right.
The money.
How did you react to that first experience? Like, was it all that you thought it would be, or was it like, oh, this ain't nothing? Like, how was it for you?
So I mean, again, you grew up in the community, right? So jail systems are just a microcosm of the community. They're reflective of the community. They pick the worst pieces out, allegedly, and they house them in a location. So if you live in a community that has issues, going to jail, you see some of the same people. Personality traits are personality traits, right? Whether it's a Jeffrey Dahmer, or whoever, right? You understand the personality traits. You're like, okay, I know what this guy does. I know what this guy does. When I walked into the facility in correctional department, I wasn't nervous at all. But like I said, I had already dealt with this. But when I walked into it when I was in Savannah, in Chatham County, it was an opening experience, because it was and mind you, I didn't say this part, but my mother, she worked for traffic in the city. But when we moved to Savannah, when I was going to the 11th grade, she became a deputy sheriff.
Okay.
Right. So I understood that aspect from it too. But so walking into when I first got the job out there, it was definitely different. Seeing personalities, the games that are played. I think anybody that says they weren't nervous to an extent from their first introduction, is either not telling the truth or have some issues themselves, right? Especially when you don't, because these are not normal situations. We should never feel comfortable walking into an environment where people have issues of such, right? Because it should not be normal human behavior. Although people have issues, we shouldn't accept it as like, well, this is what it is. And some people do accept it because they grow up in these areas and they see nothing different sometimes. But I think if you don't grow up in that type of environment per se, you can still live in a community. You can still live, in a community where these things are going on and still be protected from them, right? So it's not to say that just because you live there that you're going through all these experiences. Because I grew up in communities that I was protected. Like, my mother knew I was at. She called and paid attention. We didn't have, I had things in my house. We didn't have, unsavory people around. Like, I barely could bring my friends home. She wanted to know like a whole,
resume. She needed a resume.
Resume, yeah. Like, what's he get? You know what I mean? So I was like, I forget it. I ain't bringing nobody home. But yeah, no. So in Savannah, yeah, it was a little, nervousness initially. But it didn't take long, right? The adaptability comes quick, just because you're around these individuals, and once you start seeing the personality traits, you're like, okay, I know how to deal with this one. I know how to deal with that one. So when I got to city, when I first got to Rec, I walked, I think my first OJT facility, I want to say, was AMKC on OJT. Which is the most populated facility, or at least it was at one time, on the island, right? It was the largest, right? It had everything in there. That and GMDC were the two places I went on OJT. I'm sad to say, but it was like a familiar environment.
Right.
Just because I had experienced it, but I also knew. I remember walking in on OJT in a housing area in GMDC and seeing someone who lived in my building, who's a very good close friend in a housing unit, right? And I say that to say that this is what goes on, right? So it wasn't an uncomfortable thing. Like, I know who this person is, and I know them outside of this, and they may have done something that had got them into this predicament. But I have to deal with these people in the street. I always tell them, I have conversations like with people who are not familiar with law enforcement. I always tell them, when you ride the train in the bus, it's the same people sitting next to you on the bus as it is that's incarcerated.
Right.
Like, don't think that there's a different. You just don't absorb it because the environment is different. You don't see bars. You don't see. There's not this overtone that's placed upon you. But people have things that go on in their life, right? And we treat people accordingly. But I mean, to answer your question, I wasn't really nervous on the second go around when I got the job at the city. So I kind of adapted to it at that particular point.
So now you went from officer to captain, ADW, on the way up. Out of all the ranks that you worked in, I want to know, did you have a favorite? And if you did, what made that rank your favorite?
Did I have a favorite rank? My favorite rank was actually officer.
Really?
Yeah, so I used to love the job. I mean, I came on the job in 1999. Right? April 1st, 1999, I went to the academy. The academy was like 3 or 4 months. So sometime after the end of the summer, you go into the jail. And I just saw the respect and honor that came along with like performing a job. And back then the job was very uniform, and I don't mean that by the uniform itself, but it was very organized. Right? You came in, there was a search, the people knew their job. They came in, it was a search. People's uniforms were clean cut and straight. It was a different time. It was also when I came on the job, it was a lot of what we call old timers, or dinosaurs in parentheses, that people put in with these hash marks all up and down the arm that wouldn't talk to you for a year, until they understood who you were and got to see who you were. But what they did show you was the structure and organization. And you don't need to speak, right? Things that are understood don't need to be said.
Absolutely.
And when you see structure, you know structure. When you walk in the housing area and the guy with the female with the 30 stripes on their arm tells you to stand right there and make sure he doesn't, do something. The confidence that's exuded in the tonality out of their voice gives you confidence and courage to perform the job, right? So those are the things that kind of existed at that time. For me, just looking at, having to work there, people and different things of that nature. So I got that. I think that the structure overall at that time was different than it is now in the performance of the job. So. I don't know if I answered the question per se, but... Well,
you did. You said being an officer was your most favorite career, right? Yeah. But now that, what comes a good answer comes a bad one. Like if you said, I wish I didn't have to go to captain to move up, or if I didn't have to go to dep. Like, which rank that you would take the shield and be like, man, y'all could keep this. Like, I this was too much work.
So for me, I grew up with an ambitious mentality, similar to you. I grew up with an ambitious mentality. My thoughts are always different. I always saw myself as achieving things.
Okay.
I always have, belief in myself. I was taught that as a family. That's a family teaching, right? Your people teach you that. Your village teaches you that. You have to develop. It's like a baby walking, right? When a baby wants to walk, there's this encouragement that goes along with this, and it turns into belief. Then they start taking steps. They fall. They hold your 2 fingers, with both hands, and you let them walk a little bit. And then the belief turns into courage, right? And then the courage turns, into ability, right? So then once you understand your abilities, then I can do everything. So I grew up in that kind of environment and household. My grandmother used to talk to me, and it's funny. My mother was a very introspective part of me being, because she was the disciplinarian, the structure one. Let's get up and go. Like, she would bring projects home that I never saw before in my life. Like, put this glass window on my shower. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, and don't mess it up, and you don't make that's my bath. And I'm like, yo, how am I gonna do? I've never done this before. But those things kind of taught me to kind of move forward. But my point I was saying, my grandma used to talk to me in a way that I always thought that I was could do anything. Right? And I didn't realize till a teenager that what she had done. So she would, when I did something, she would like, Sean, how did you know how to do that? That was amazing. Like, how did you do that? And I'm like, oh, you just do it like this. But what she was doing was subconsciously making me believe that I could do and achieve anything, right? Which is significantly important in our existence and our production of who we are and how we perform and do anything and how we exist. So in the world of correction, for me, it was symbolic because I believed I could achieve these things. So when I saw rank and I realized that y'all just want me to read this, that's it. If I read this stuff, that's it, and y'all gonna pay me more? All right, cool. I understood the concept, right? And I understood and believed that I could do it. And a lot of people don't. It starts with believing that you can do these things first. You have to see yourself in it. You have to be, and it doesn't start like you don't see yourself in it right at the time that it's going on. You have to have vision way before the situations or opportunities present themselves and come into existence. So I saw myself going up when I was an officer, and I don't, I'm a firm believer that I don't like to stay anywhere too long, or as they say in the South, don't let the grass grow under your feet. Right. I don't like to stay in any position or lane too long. So for me, I was an officer for 5 years, right? I was in the jail for, I want to say a little less than 2 years, right? And I saw these opportunities come out. And the opportunities were, teletypes and things, from an internal perspective, the teletypes of job opportunities or openings and positions. And I saw these opportunities. And there was an opportunity that came my way. I saw this particular opportunity, and I was like, I'm still on probation. I'm not even going to go for it. Because they're not going to, the word on the street was they're not going to give you a shot or listen to you or hear anything you have to say.
But let me tell you, that's the way of a lot of people tend to do that, and it gets embedded in the head, and most people will automatically stop, right? Because that happened for me. Like, I applied when I went from in the captain's position, and I was in the jail, and I was like, teletype out for some godforsaken post that you never even heard from. What was nutritional service division? I was like, we have what is that? And I'll never forget, they had 2 days of interviews, and I was the last person to interview on the last day of the interviews. By the time I left the interview and went back to my facility, I had got the call that I had the position. But the people were so in my ear, girl, they already got somebody for that. Don't even put it in. They already got somebody. And that's a big stigma in corrections.
Yes. And we have to stop that. And I want to say this. I want to make a point, and people can take it how they want to take it. But it's us against us. Right. You understand? Because the people that are saying that are the people that look like you. You understand? And it's us against us. But I will say that there's this mentality that exists where, again, I go back to what I said, where we're taught not to believe. You can't do that. I remember watching a video, and I don't want to say I hate to bring them up, but to bring them up, I was watching a video recently on YouTube, and it was about an interview with Jay-Z, and it was a clip of it. And he was saying how he was trying, he was making his records, and he was saying he was going to go sell a million records. And his uncle said, you ain't selling no million records. Who do you think you are? You ain't never doing that. Right? And then he said, he goes to sell, he says one of the lines, I sold a million records a million times. Right? If he had believed that, if he had absorbed that, you wouldn't know who he was. Correct. Because he wouldn't done something else, or, maybe not done anything. Because somebody who didn't believe was an influencer in his life, and have influence to the point that they can control the direction or the wavelength and vibration of these people in the way they think. And oftentimes we do that amongst each other. As I was saying, I said to myself, right? And I put in for it, but it's funny because at the same time that I put in for it, I got a call from a good friend. and his name was Terrence Graham. His name is Terrence Graham. He's still alive. It's not was. And he was also, you think he retired as a deputy warden, but he was a captain at the time, and he was like, "Yo, I think you would be good for it. Put in for it." And I was like, "Yeah, they're gonna rip it up. As soon as they see it in personnel, they're gonna throw it away." And he said, "No, I'm gonna make sure that it gets to where it needs to go." Right, and he did that. And big shout out to another person who was very instrumental in structuring my early stages of my career too, Feline Breland. She was very, if you work with Feline, you worked, right? She was a worker.
Definitely.
She worked you. She's also a teacher though, and you have to learn to deal with that, right? Because there's a learning process for all of us, and in order for anybody to get anything, they have to be willing to do the work. Right? Nothing comes without you willing to do the work. It don't matter if you have to perform. One of the things that are required for success, there are two things, rather, exposure and exploitation. It's mandatory. You have to expose your skill. If you're saying you're good at something, right, let me see. You have to expose it, and then you have to allow it to be exploited, meaning that people have to test it.
Right.
They have to try it, touch it, feel it. It's if you're selling a product, and you say this is the best product, they say, let me see the product. All right, cool. And then they go and try the product, or they go and play with the toy, or there's a testing phase, right? So those are things that are required of that. And one of the things that I really understood from her was that implementation of exposure and exploitation. Like, you got to do the work. You get out here and do the work and get it right. And those are things that I got from my mother. But it just aligned when I got working with her and around her, and the influence that she had. So I wound up getting the job in public information, right? Because that was what I put in for.
Right.
And I remember going on the interview. I'm a young kid, right? I'm this young black kid from Harlem, between Harlem and the Bronx. Big shout out to my Bronx family.
Hey,
I grew up, what I'm saying? I'm putting my ex up now. Big shout out to the ex. I grew up in Kingsbridge Road in the Bronx.
Me too.
I went to school.
We gotta talk about
in Harlem. Yeah, Franklin Plaza. Big shout out to Franklin Plaza, 1199,
right.
East Level, Wagner, that whole thing. Wilson. I want to lose my thought real quick. I'm trying to grab it back on the air.
My bad. Sorry. Bronx got me excited. I'm sorry.
No. Oh, I was talking about, understanding and working with Feline, exposure and exploitation.
Public information. Public information.
Yeah, I was talking about public information. Oh, so I only got the job. I'm this young kid. I got braids in my hair at the time. Right, cornrows going back, right? Because that was the style. I still grew up. I'm an urban kid. I'm an urban man. I grew up. That was what was, it just was the style. It was like, all the kids wear, Gucci belts and Louis Vuitton belts, and it's just what it was, right? So when I go in, I'm like, yeah, go on an interview. I went to the interview with me. But one of the things that I always had, and I always knew this, and it was always expressed to me, your ability to orate. I think people are more so taken back from what they see me as to when they hear my conversation.
Correct.
Right? The words, the use of vocabulary, it's always an oxymoron. They're like, that don't go together.
Mm-hmm.
It don't go together. But it's so intriguing to them that they want me around.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I got the job. Sandy Smith, God bless her, I rest her soul.
Yeah, she was a sweet woman. She definitely was.
Yeah, Sandy Smith. Yeah, she was sweet, and she also was no games. She would get busy, man. She worked. She was another worker, and I learned so much of her. She was very instrumental and influential. But so I got the job, and I remember Feline coming in my office. So this is when I was at 60 Hudson at the time, right? And just when headquarters was at 60 Hudson Street, for those who remember that. Wasn't always the Boulevard building.
Right.
And we come in the office, and in the back, you go to headquarters, all the way in the back. I'm in the back. So there's three people in the back. It's the commissioner, first deputy commissioner, and the deputy commissioner for public information. Only three in that wing, right? And so they, you know, their jobs are very important. At that time, they were aligned. I don't know what they're doing now, but they were aligned, and they were aligned for a reason, because you need your mouthpiece, which is your public information person. The commissioner is the commissioner, and the first deputy commissioner was, at that time, dealt with a lot of operational issues. You know, that's how it was aligned. So they would all need to communicate constantly and represent the agency accordingly. But I remember getting a job and sitting in the office, and I remember Feline, when the captain's test came up, and I remember Feline coming in the office and telling me this. She says, you know, so far you got good, you know, good recommendation. You got, you know, you're doing well. You know, Sandy says you're great. She said, but you see that captain exam? She told me, she said, if you don't score on the top, if you're not in the first class, you won't be here no more. And I was like, what? I was like, what? She was like, yeah, if you don't score on the top, she said, you're in headquarters. We don't do that. I'm like, oh man. So now the heat and the pressure game is on. I'm like,
right, you under pressure.
Class. So now I'm trying to hear, well, what's the top class? How many people they put in? Like, what's this? How does this look, right? And so I knew. I'm just to talk about her. Like, that's who she was. Like, she made sure, you know, that you knew that you had a responsibility and expectation, that there was a standard. Right. You know, and I, you know, and obviously, needless to say, obviously I passed the exam, and I was in the first class. I actually was number 2.
Okay.
Not to go crazy. Big shout out to Tamara Jolly, and now Tamara Winter, because she was number 1. She beat me.
Well, that was my classmate. That was my classmate. That's what I'm talking about. Jolly was the best. Well, Winter, Jolly, you know, she's the best. Absolutely, and she had a great career as well. But
phenomenal career.
My more important is I want to wrap this correction segment up, because I really want to talk to you about what you got going on now. So if you had to tell someone right now, this is my, you know, closing, and they were coming on the job, what advice would you give them? Hey, Mr. Jones, I'm getting ready to become a New York City's Department of Correction officer. What advice you have for me?
Know your business. That's the biggest advice I could give anybody. Read those policies, understand them, and stand on them. You have to know how to articulate something in your verbiage. Read it in their verbiage, but understand it in yours. And I think part of the problem is that we try to read these things in their verbiage. Go find somebody who can translate. When I was studying for the captain's exam, and I'll give shout out to Ted and Feline again. I used to study on 90th Street and First Avenue, Starbucks. I was studying so much and so long by myself at the table that it was some nice, beautiful ladies there, and I wouldn't pay for coffee no more. I was coming in, and they was like, "Can you go? Don't worry about it." And I'm like, "All right." And I'm in there, I'm closing it. I'm getting off of work, I'm going there, and I'm closing the joint with them, right? And I learned how to understand policy. And when I didn't understand something, I would call Ted and Feline, or they would even stop by from time to time and see what you're doing. You still on it, you know? And I remember, so I got a friend, very good friend, one of my best friends. He just recently retired as a captain, Omar Green, and you know, he's from my neighborhood. You know, we grew up in the same co-op, Franklin Plaza, and he will tell you he watched me go every day to study. He watched me go, come home, throw my book bag on, say what's up to everybody, and going. I would walk from where I was to 90th Street every day while I was studying for these exams. And he said, yo, I watched your transition. Like, I saw it before my eyes. And the reason I'm saying that is you have to know your business, and you got to be dedicated to knowing it. You know, there's people to this day that I've heard say, oh, they don't understand use of force policy still. And these are people with 10 or 15 years on the job. Right. But if you don't understand use of force or policy at this stage of your career, you got a big problem. You got a big problem. You know, we got, you know, culturally, I'll say this culturally, and I'm going to speak to culture because this is my culture. We got to stop chasing the money and chase the information. We have to build on intelligence. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's very important. We're chasing money, and we're buying all of these things that we consider to be success. foreign vehicles and all of that. When you develop the skill, the money comes with it. When I developed the understanding of the policy, there was nothing you could tell me. Of course I'm walking in an exam, taking it, and scoring number 2. Because I dedicated in the process of understanding this policy. You can't tell me nothing about it.
Because you done dissected
your language.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I interpreted it to mine. Now I understand what it means. And now I'm going to change the word. The and the mean 2 different things. But you have to know that they mean 2 different things. Mm-hmm. Right? And people are like, lawyers are wordsmiths. Lawyers are wordsmiths. They study definitions, legal definitions in Latin. Right? And they study legal cases. And they go in and they fight based upon information. There's no wizardry that goes on. But they're dedicated to studying and learning that Latin, to learning those legal definitions, and to learning those legal precedent cases. And that's how they represent you. That's it. You can represent yourself.
So what I'm getting is for the young person to come on there, know your shit.
Know your business. Know that business. Read those policies. Don't allow the senior person to tell you. And it's good. You get senior people with information, but you got to be careful and make sure you're talking to the right senior person. Mm-hmm. You got to make sure you're talking to the right supervisor. It's just like your life. Everybody don't know everything. So don't assume what you see is what you get. Right? You may see decorations. A car may look beautiful, but the engine may be garbage.
Correct.
The brain may be done. Like somebody may be, look to have the appearance and all, but I know what they're talking about. There's so many times I watch people get jammed up in situations because they don't know the policy and information. And it's readable. This stuff they're not hiding it. You can go in FIS or any of these places and grab the policy and say, and if you don't understand it, there's a requirement. See, and people don't understand these deputy wardens, they have a responsibility. Forget all this egotistical stuff. One of the things that I prided myself on that job was the fact that I would stop and talk to anybody. Anybody could ask me. I was touchable. No matter how high I went, I was tangible. If you see me, I always stop and engage conversation with people.
Right.
I always say, how you doing? And that's when you take the time to say, hey, look, let me ask you something. Could you explain this to me? Go in the Deputy Warden Administration's office. Go in the Deputy Warden Security Office. I don't understand. Go in the Warden's office. That's their job. That's their job. It's not just to tell you what to do. They have to explain the interpretation of that. That's not only the Academy's job. When you come out, they're your leaders. So they have a responsibility to teach you consistently. But what used to happen was, you come out, you go to Academy, and a lot of high-level supervisors assume that, well, Academy, you didn't learn in Academy? No. Academy is 16 weeks or 18, whatever it is, and you think you're supposed to learn everything? No, it don't work like that. I come out, you still teach me continuously. And all I can say to wrap that up and answer that question is, when you get these jobs, learn that business, learn that use of force policy, right? Because that's number one. That's the one that's going to take your freedom. That's the one that's going to get you indicted. That's the one that's going to get you the lawsuit. That's the one that's going to leave you broke for the rest of your life if you don't know it.
Right.
Right? Learn these policies, read them, understand them, and go in these offices and make these people work for you. You're an officer, but you're still a citizen. Just because you're an officer don't mean you can't pick up the phone and call and say, well, I'm Citizen Jones right now, and I want to speak to the warden. Yeah, I think there's a confusion. We pay taxes. I'm an employee, but I'm also a person who paying taxes here. So I just signed off the clock. Now I'm a citizen and I want to talk to you. But stand up for your business. Stand up for your rights. Right? And know your business. When you don't know your business, people say you anything. They give you anything. And a lot of people don't assume that they know the business because they're in these roles. That's the flip side of that. Don't assume that because a person has, titles, again, we're getting to the wordsmith thing, but titles were the thing was created for confusion. Right? Because we follow them without question. Because we're taught to. And that goes all the way from mother and father, right, to supervisor. You follow without question. And it's not until you have life-challenging experience that you begin to question what you were told. Well, I'm here today to tell you, question it before something happens. and challenge the people. You know, we are the religion that we are, including myself, because my brother told me that's what I was. I never ventured out to find nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Most people don't until they're in a predicament where there's a need for them to go look and research. We believe in those. We're very trusting. We have to kind of like challenge people, especially us. We're trusting and loving people as a culture. We have to challenge. You have to challenge people and say, okay, what are you giving me here? Because it's okay. Make them, if they're good at what they do, right, then make them perform. If they're a warden, or they're a deputy warden, or they're an ADW, or they're a captain, and you're an officer and you're confused about something, make them perform. Cap, I don't understand this. Can you explain this to me? It's a section on highlighter. It's confusing. And if they don't know, guess what? There's somebody for you to go to. ADW, fake. And it keeps going on. But we get caught into this whole thing of, you know, intimidated and people treating us like garbage, don't want to speak. And nah, make them speak. I used to make people talk. I'll make you talk. Hey, good morning. How you doing? Everything all right? And y'all make them talk. And you get the, hey, how you doing? All right, you come here. Let me ask you something. And now I'm going to make you talk. To shake that off. Because that's not what we're here for. Right. We're here to grow. It's a development process. This is supposed to be a loving environment. When I came on the job and when you came on the job, this was an environment, although it was a jail, and it wasn't the best environment, we had a loving culture amongst us. You had older people. I worked in 74 in OBCC on my jails. You know, I remember getting into an incident in OBCC and getting transferred because of the incident. It was use of force. And getting transferred on probation and getting to 74, which was one of the as an officer, one of the best things that happened to my career. Phenomenal officers in OBCC. But it was a younger crowd, younger generation. When I got to 74, I saw dinosaurs. And that's where the information came. That's when the learning started. For OBCC at the time, you want to perform or operate, it was a hands-on jail, right? You CPSU, rolling on the floor, getting to these incidents. I know how to put a fire and all that stuff out. Mm-hmm. Right? But when I got to 74, you know, that's when you get the Nessie Hafizes, you know, and you know, the Manny Bailey, who was a deputy warden at the time there. Yeah. Right? Warden Robinson. You get the culture of these people. You know, Johnny Maxwell. You get the culture of these people, you know, some of them are officers, some of them are high in rank, but they pull you in and talk to you. You get told what's right, what's wrong. They'll chastise you. Come here, youngin'. Hey, rookie, come here. And they'll realign you. You might not like it, but they're going to realign you. Right? So my point to that is saying, make the people work. You're there for that to perform a function and a service. But if you don't know how to perform it, make the people work to teach you. But also, you have a responsibility in tandem with that to learn these policies and read them. You can't no longer go on saying, I don't get it, I don't understand it. They're taking your freedom. The families are being destroyed. If you feel that the use of force was justified, if you feel, it doesn't have to be use of force, whatever you've done, if you feel it was justified, make sure the policy says that it was justified. Because you can stand on that. We can go all the way to court on that. If it's in writing, then we can stand on that. If it's not in writing, right, then it's hard for you to stand on something, right? In most instances. There are some times when you can, you know, but most instances, the first things people go to is what's indoctrinated. Well, what did you put here? Well, you put I had to go left, so I went left. What's the problem? Well, you shouldn't have went left today. Well, they don't say that. It says I go left. It don't say don't go left on Wednesday. Right. It says go left. You understand? So, but you got to know that and believe in that and stand on that. And stand on it, yes. And stand on it. You know, so I'll wrap that up. I don't want to drag that point out too much, but it's a very important point, and you asked that, and it's very important. What would I tell them today? And that's to know your business. Whatever you do. It doesn't have to be New York City Correction. It doesn't have to be NYPD. You don't got to be law enforcement, period. But whatever you get involved in, research the business. If you want to buy stocks, research. Most people who sell stocks, they look at the Wall Street Journal, right? They look at all the, and every newspaper is a stock. And the back of it is the stock things. So people are looking and they're researching before they invest. They start doing research. What is this company about? What do they sell? How do they sell? Who else is? What other competitions do they have? You have to know your complete surroundings before you make a decision that's going to be impactful for you for the rest of your life.
Right.
You know? So yeah, so that's my answer to that. So.
Well, that's great. Thank you for giving us all of that insight about corrections and life. But we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and talk about what we need to talk about. You being an author and your book. Guys, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Mr. Sean Jones. Make sure you tune in next week to catch part 2, not only with the phenomenal chief, but with my extraordinary assistant, Kavia. You don't want to miss it. I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and I look forward to bringing you many more, all with positive vibes. Remember, whatever you do, do it from the heart, with love and passion. Stay safe. Talk to you soon.